Welcome to your Dairy Checkoff podcast from Dairy Management, Inc., where dairy checkoff leaders and farmers share real stories, strategies, and insights that grow sales and build trust for U.S. dairy. Let's get started.
I am Barb O'Brien, CEO of DMI. Excited to talk today about the State of the Industry report, which frankly is a critical role that DMI plays in partnership with USDEC and others in looking at where the industry is going on behalf of dairy farmers. We commissioned the report in early 2024 to look at those changing dynamics in the marketplace and worked very closely with the National Milk and USDEC economics team, as well as with Mike McCully. So I'm going to pause for a minute and let Mike and Will both say hello.
Hi, Barb. Thanks. It was a great project to work on with Will and the team, as well as the folks there at DMI. And happy to be on the podcast here today and share some of our thoughts on what we found.
Thanks for having us on, Barb. We're excited. So Will Loux, I lead the econ team here for National Milk and USDEC. And it's just been a fun project to work on, but also one that I think we're excited to see kind of what we can do with it and how it impacts checkoff and organizational strategies too.
And Will, that's really what this report was all about, because we all stepped back and looked at all of the changing dynamics. We wanted to ensure, first and foremost, our dairy farmers were ready for the change that was coming, but use it as a tool for planning across the checkoff and, frankly, across the industry. The report certainly confirms unprecedented developments at the farm and the plant level. I think we were originally estimating it was maybe $7 billion in new and expanded infrastructure. That number's maybe $8 or $8.5 billion at this point. In my mind, we need to look at it in what, in fact, is a constantly changing global marketplace. The geopolitical dynamics and economic dynamics that we're dealing with right now are really a lens that we need to apply to the programming we're putting in market here and now, but also longer term. It was designed really to provide an outlook of U.S. dairy supply growth through 2030, to lay out scenarios, supply and demand changes that we see, and the potential impacts in terms of U.S. dairy's growth. You gentlemen used forecasting to look at future supply, future demand, and what we can expect in terms of category growth across the various sectors. And importantly, as we all enter a new strategic planning phase, 2026 to 2028, we're going to use this report to help guide our strategies and, to look at how we're going to ensure growth over time. So with that, gentlemen, what was your role and why do you believe this report at this point in time is so important?
Yeah, I can start off with this, certainly. So I think there were a few kind of pieces with this. Is one, actually going back to March or February of 2024 is when this really sort of kick-started. Mike and I gave a joint presentation on some of the big changes that we saw happening within the industry to checkoff leaders, both at the national checkoff and state and regional level as well. And that's kind of where this got rolling. Mike and I have worked together informally for many years. My role as head economist for both the Export Council and National Milk kind of provided a good platform to dig plenty into what's happening internationally, as well as what's happening on the farm sector. And then I'll praise Mike as being one of the foremost leaders in kind of what's happening in the product side and the processing side of things as well. And then it wasn't just us either. And Mike can talk a little bit more about his role and everything else here too. But Peter Vitaliano, longtime economist with National Milk, had a great perspective to add. We utilized Madeline Daly a lot from DMI to provide that consumer landscape. We certainly used other members of my team here, especially Monica Ganley, Stephen Kane, Allison Wilton. This was really kind of a team effort behind the scenes. Certainly folks probably see Mike and I the most. But I think certainly a lot of credit goes to kind of how we aggregated a lot of collective knowledge into a finished product, where this is also something that we're continuing to mess with and look at and see how things are evolving and how our forecasts hold up, especially right now, because folks are not stopping new capacity. Because you mentioned we basically, when we started, we went to 6, 7, 8.5. The 2 Chobani announcements we saw in quick succession probably put us to 10. So We'll see how this evolves. But maybe, Mike, you want to touch on a little bit of your role and your background within all this.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Will. I started working in the dairy industry in 1996, so been around for quite a few years. A lot of time in the food business at Kraft, and then for the last nearly 13 years consulting with companies everywhere from the farm gate all the way out to the end consumer and the end users. So it's, for me, it's been really rewarding to see dairy from the farm gate all the way out to the consumer and seeing all parts of the value chain in between. And I think that was really, as Will mentioned, kind of the genesis of the whole project was over a year ago, looking at all of the new investments, which is exciting, but that also brings challenges and changes to the industry, whether that's at the farm level, the processing level, what the outlook is for demand and so forth. So, I think, and Will and I, we both say that, while we have our, the internal team or, as far as our own work on this, on a regular basis, on a daily, weekly basis, we're talking to people, not only here in the U.S., but around the world, end users, other manufacturers, suppliers, traders, to really bring in a very broad view in terms of what's going on, not just here in the U.S., but then globally, and as well as what the outlook is. So I think it provided even, added some additional richness to the report that way.
Were there findings that were surprising to you?
I think, and Will, I'm sure will amplify on this too, but I think, a year or more ago, we were looking at all this investment. And I think one of the big questions from, a lot of people were, where's all the milk going to come from? Milk production hadn't been growing, still isn't growing that much. And in total, all this capacity being added, whether it's cheese plants, milk plants, other product plants, was the equivalent of roughly 8 to 10% of U.S. milk production, which is huge. I've never seen anything like this before. And so that was really the main question. When one of the answers that I've given over time is, it's not necessarily that where the plants, these new plants, will get the milk. It's what plants won't get the milk. And we've seen that dynamic playing out now. And it's really started middle of last year, and it's gotten, probably even more pronounced in some regions this year. And I think that only increases going forward. So this is, again, it's depending on where you're at from a farmer standpoint. In some areas, this has actually improved or has the ability to improve milk prices and premiums. And that's, again, probably one of the main positives that I see, at least from the farm level, coming out of this.
Yeah, I think there were certainly kind of surprises as we went along, and the markets continued to move on us a little bit. I'd say Mike and I were certainly back in 23, it would have been, was when we first started looking at all this new cheese capacity coming online. It was, we had announced plants equivalent to 500,000 metric tons, basically, the equivalent of our cheese exports in total of new capacity. But the other things that we talked about, especially at that early 24 meeting with Checkoff leadership, was we had 4 big kind of mega trends that we saw going on. Was one, the capacity investment was certainly the big piece that I think kind of sparked a lot of this conversation. But we also were looking at a U.S. consumer that was still coming out of a high inflation environment. And in many ways, they're still trying to recover from a high inflation environment. We also were talking about the structural evolution within China. And I think that was a major one that we had picked up and were really watching to see how that really went out. And then we also had a number of other factors that we were sort of like, how does this all fit together with milk supply? Being kind of that key critical question of, are we going to have the milk for the plant? So I echo Mike certainly on it became kind of, what do we do with all this cheese to, are we going to have milk to fill these plants, or who gets it, or what are the implications for our product mix? I think that was the follow-up question of, how do we move up the value chain? How do we add value to the milk that we're seeing? Well, also the fact of, for right now, especially given the dynamics on replacement heifers and everything else, there wasn't going to be a massive increase in milk production, at least not right away. And so at the same time, I think the conversations that I know I've mentioned quite a bit with you, Barb, and everything else is, in the short term right now, we probably don't have enough milk for the processing that's coming online, but that milk supply is going to come. Dairy farmers are very good at responding to financial incentives, and the market is saying we need more milk, especially with this new capacity. So I think as I look out towards 27 and beyond, as milk production really does start to ramp back up, especially on a component basis, it's where are opportunities to drive demand, both here in the United States, especially as consumers hopefully recover and are in a better position, current outlook notwithstanding in geopolitics, but really as we look out towards this longer term where U.S. consumers have really been one of the key driving forces of cheese, butter, protein demand. And then we also see those same trends happening overseas. So that's the sort of 2 trains passing in the night of, how do we incentivize more growth because we need it today, but also how do we incentivize more demand because we're going to need it tomorrow?
Yeah, you both touched on the farm level implication of the report. Let's pull that thread a little bit and talk about the implications and ultimately how you see this trend or this movement over the next 3-5 years. What's the benefit ultimately to the farmer community?
But I'd say right in the short term, I think this is an opportunity for dairy farmers. Mike has said it many times of the cheap pools of surplus milk are basically gone today. I mean, you are seeing capacity has gone where the market was saying, hey, there's an opportunity to add additional capacity here. And that creates fundamentally competition for milk, which benefits dairy farmers. And I think that is good. And I think benefits the industry as kind of a free marketer. Competition is helpful in that way. As we look ahead over this next kind of era, I think you're seeing dairy farmers also diversify their income stream. This is not a new thing, but between digesters, between especially beef on dairy becoming very relevant. But we also see dairy farmers who are choosing to invest over these next 5 to 10 years and really at that longer term horizon. I think as we look at that picture, it's this round of new capacity that we've been talking about, this 8 billion, 9 billion, whatever it is now. We're still going to actually need more capacity before the end of the decade here too, in large part because there is demand for U.S. dairy products. And so I think that's sort of the optimism here for dairy farmers is this is not a static picture. This is not a last gasp of the U.S. building capacity. This is an evolution and an acceleration of the U.S.'s opportunity to really shine as a dairy industry from farm to processing to export. And as we look at other countries, New Zealand, Europe, they're mostly just replacing old plants. We are investing new and expanding, and I think that gives us a critical opportunity, but it's not one that's going to come easy either.
Yeah, those are all great points. When I've presented on this over the last 6 to 9 months or so, I've started presentations by saying, do not lose sight of this. The United States is growing, and the amount of investment is unprecedented. Our competitors are not doing this. Europe, New Zealand, other countries are not investing. They're not growing. The U.S. is, and that sends a strong signal to people and buyers and companies outside the U.S. as well. So that's one of the main things I like to really highlight is that there's all this investment. There's a lot of companies, a lot of people that are bullish on the future of dairy and dairy demand, and they're putting a lot of money behind it. So don't lose sight of the fact that that's the case. Another point, and probably maybe saying it a little different way, as Will mentioned, for years and years and years, there's always been parts of the country where milk is chasing plants and getting cheap to finally attract processing investment or plant investment in those areas to absorb the milk and then allow for future growth. We're now in an environment where plants are chasing milk, and that's very, very different. And again, that's a good thing from a farmer standpoint because it's going to raise the premiums and raise milk prices. But it also creates challenges. If those farmers own co-ops or other plants and non-co-op plants, if their milk costs go up, it creates some additional challenges. And again, we've seen this over the years, and it's going to create opportunities, but it also creates challenges for different companies. And that's going to be one of the the ones that are challenged. How do they adapt in this new environment, whether it's at the farm level or at the plant level?
You spend a lot of time talking to dairy cooperatives, processing organizations. What are the impacts to the industry as a whole, and what can they take away from this?
It feels like a lot of things are clicking in dairy right now. Last year, fluid milk sales were up for the first time year over year since 2009. Look at the growth in all of the the specialty milks and things like that. Look at the growth in fat. Look at butter. Cheese is growing. Cottage cheese, yogurt consumption is up a lot last year. So there's just a lot of really good news. Protein. Great trend, great story here from dairy. So we've got a lot of really good things happening. And again, companies are investing to take advantage of those opportunities here going forward. So I think, again, that really is a very, very positive story out there for dairy. And one that, for those of us who've been around here for a long time, have probably waited for some of these things. I always joke that, I was one of the few people under the age of 75 that ate cottage cheese. And now we've got, it's such a sexy product. You get all over social media and look at the growth in cottage cheese as an example. So there's lots of really good stories out there around dairy. And I think from a processor standpoint, there's the large scale processors that are really good at doing what they're doing. when it, creating, whether it's making milk powders or cheese, cheddar cheese or mozzarella cheese. But, as Will and I've been talking here, I think a lot of the focus is on these new cheese plants, but there's also a lot of new investment in extended shelf life beverages, dairy beverages. I myself am working on several projects on high protein milk drinks and dairy drinks, and look at the amount of investment that's going on across the country, CDI in California, all the way through to Cayuga in New York, and a number of points in between of dairy co-ops, of plants that are investing in beverages, dairy beverages, protein beverages, packaging, extended shelf life, aseptics. There's a lot of that. There's several ice cream investments. There's cottage cheese investments. There's sour cream investments. There's butter investments. So it's not just cheese. There's a lot of investment out there on a lot of different products. And again, it's for domestic as well as growth into exports.
If I could just build on your comment too, I was just looking at the sales data, particularly at retail, and that momentum we felt coming out of 24 continues in 25. We're still seeing great double-digit growth in butter and cottage cheese, to your point, stable growth across some of the other sectors. So you're right. I mean, this is an equal opportunity or a full portfolio opportunity for sure. As you look at where we are today, are there key takeaways that, again, you want to ensure farmers and the processing community understand from this report? What are the big calls to action here?
I've seen this over the last year or so, talking to farmers, cooperatives, and it's a word I hadn't heard for a while, is optimism. That there's optimism. Dairy farmers are optimistic, maybe a little more cautious than what maybe to start the year, with a lot of noise here with tariffs and trades and things like that. But longer term, there's still a lot of optimism around dairy at the farm level. So that's definitely a positive thing. That's, I think, from a farmer standpoint, that's one of the key takeaways, is also what's happening with their milk. It's not just their milk going into a gallon of white jug milk anymore. Look at all the things that are happening in different extended shelf life beverages. And the protein story is really strong. It just came out of a conference the last couple of days, talking with multiple people and multiple companies about protein, whether it's whey proteins, milk proteins, liquid UF milk going into different beverages. So this protein story is really strong, and farmers have been, they've been responding to higher butter prices and protein prices, and we'll mention the growth in components. That seems to be a story going forward as well. So I think that's one of the I would say one of the good takeaways and positive messages at the farm level. At the processor level, we're still growing, and that's unlike other companies, other countries, other segments that are flat to declining, where you're focused on cost savings and closing plants and those sort of things. We're in the opposite side of that. We're actually growing, we're investing, and that's a positive story for dairy in general. It's not a straight line between here and there. There will be challenges. There'll be not everybody's going to end up winning on this, but it creates an opportunities for companies and people and farms that have the ability to invest. Whether it's a new technology, and it's not just necessarily getting bigger, it's getting better and adding more value to milk and milk components.
I certainly agree with Mike on that. And I agree with the optimism, but I'll maybe bring folks a little bit back here to earth, because I think what you said, Mike, is it's not a straight line from here to there. And the other thing I think you talked about a bit that I want to touch on is this is an opportunity. It is not a guarantee that we have this environment. This requires concerted investment. I think that is the role of Checkoff, both in terms of what's happening at the DMI and state and regional level, as well as the Export Council. Like, this takes investment. Internationally, we are seeing competition continue from Europe, New Zealand. Those are markets that are not going away. One of the key takeaways we had was, hey, China is in many ways building their own domestic industry, which actually increases our competition in the rest of the world, from New Zealand as they diversify, Europe as they look elsewhere. Competition is not going away. And that says nothing also about the competition we see from alternatives as well. Dairy needs to be on its A game, continue to invest in science, continue to invest in innovation, and really growing demand, I would say, both at here and abroad. And that's from, the bigger picture market perspective, but also on the farm side. And you're already seeing this. Dairy farmers are really good at diversifying. I mentioned that already. But I think this is something that we are going to continue to see in this environment, especially a very uncertain one as it relates to the economy today here in the United States, as well as trade relationships abroad. This is one where we're going to need to be nimble on our toes and really be a forward-looking industry that invests for the long term, but also has to be able to adapt as things change. And so that's a tough tightrope to walk. But that is sort of this optimism couched with that's not just going to be given to dairy. We're going to have to make it happen.
Hope, which is so important, is not a strategy.
Yeah.
And so there has been such intention with which DMI and USDEC have both responded to the learnings and the opportunity. Thinking about the work we've done to quantify the opportunity in the health and wellness space. Yes, it's about protein, but so much more in terms of the components, the macro and micronutrients and the opportunities we can play, strength and performance in gut health, in heart and weight management, all really important trend areas. Mike, you talked about the beverage capacity right now, the diversification of that beverage capacity. We've also done a landscape report on the beverage opportunities, where DMI has developed concepts and prototypes that can help inspire others. And then the third piece of it is, yes, retail is so important in the mix, but so is food service, both domestically and internationally. That's the other big report, landscape report we've done in this last year, looking at where those growth platforms are. And then there's all the work USDEC does. You do that going in country, identifying the specific needs of the population there and do similar kind of quantification in terms of where the growth can be for U.S. dairies. Any last comments that you want to share with farmers and with the broader industry who may be listening?
Yeah, it's not guaranteed. And I learned early in my career that if you're not growing, you're dying. So, we got to continue to be in that growth mindset. And again, it's not just getting bigger. And I think that's people probably, farmers, plants, whatever, probably misinterpret that. It's not getting bigger, it's getting better at what we do. And it's also creating new products, listening to consumers, doing the research, understanding what consumers need, not only today, but what's around the corner, what's next. Okay, we've got all this investment today, but I know we've been working with the DMI team about this. What's next? Where's the consumer going to be in a couple of years? What are those investments that we need to be making today to meet the consumer demand out for several years? So I think that's really now the challenge as we finish this work and start talking to a lot of companies and farmers about it is, okay, how are you going to take this to implement some of these learnings at your farm, at the plant, at food companies, to really tap into what we see as opportunities?
Yeah, and I'll just add to that we're not done from our team looking into a lot of this and trying to future forecast. I mean, I think this is the benefit of having a group that is devoted between USDEC, National Milk, and the work with DMI to kind of running this analysis on the regular, because things will change. There will certainly be plenty of things that make Mike and I wrong 3 years down the line. But at the same time, we want to be at least ahead of the curve and, able to react and adjust. And so I think the next phase is really going into more particulars, especially as it relates with my hat on the Export Council side, is looking more into what are the actual products that we're going to have, how much fat, how much protein, how much other skim solids, where does that all mix happen, and where are opportunities to really grow exports, not just 5 years from now, not just, but even longer term. Where are these opportunities in markets of the future? And Mike and I already did a lot of that with this report, but this kind of goes that extra level down. And that's where I'm grateful that we've got a great team behind, not just within Econ, but across the Export Council, across National Milk, and across DMI, that this thing is not just going to go live on a shelf, but can help inform strategy moving forward. And glad to be a part of that and look forward to keep doing it with y'all.
It's an ongoing process, right? In terms of our continued investment in science, which really is fundamental to inspiring some of these new areas of opportunity for our products. It's the investment you all make in going into new markets, both developed and emerging in terms of the potential of U.S. dairy around the world. The ongoing work we do hand in glove with our partners across the value chain to inspire and to do our part in terms of keeping that portfolio relevant, fresh, and meeting consumers' needs wherever they reside, right? Thank you so much for the time this afternoon, and look forward to the ongoing effort, both domestically, as we know there's still potential here, and certainly around the world. Thank you, Mike and Will. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks for having us on.
Thanks for listening to Your Dairy Checkoff podcast. Want to hear more about how your checkoff is making every drop count? Head over to dairycheckoff.com or follow us wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.